Three mere mortals discover their ability to create entire universes with their minds alone. Upon discovering their abilities, these three, gods if you will, join forces to create the Dark and Stormy Nights, a supercharged team of creatives with the aim of helping artists and writers around the world while combating the forces of boredom and mundanity. They are the Dark and Stormy Nights.
All right, folks, this is Loki, and this is the Dark and Stormy Nights, and introduce yourselves.
I thought you were doing a one-man show this time. This is Tyr.
And Odin.
And I'm a little buzzed, but I have to be when we're talking about... Well, okay, yes, it's cold, but when we're talking about editing and this part of the process...
Yeah, editing has that effect on me, too.
I need drinks, and a lot of them. Today, it's been Angry Balls.
See, I prefer to write
that is
with a buzz and edit sober.
You're supposed to.
That is...
We're throwing caution to the wind here.
I'm just the opposite. I write completely stone cold sober usually. I mean, except for on the air. Well, actually, it's usually written by the time we get to the air.
Right.
But then, yeah, editing, I'm just like, give me another drink. So Angry Balls, by the way, is Fireball in Angry Orchard. We're substituting. We had Red's Apple Ale. That's what we had available.
It works.
And, yeah, it works okay. And then I was having Kahlua and hot chocolate, which is also lovely. I'm about 5 in now, I think.
Really?
Jesus.
Well, between everything.
So it's going to be an entertaining
I'm
episode.
buzzed a little bit. Yeah,
I mean...
I need to be, man. I hate...
It's editing.
Look, I hate
really
looking at how terrible a writer I am.
I mean... you're right. Like, you go through and you write that whole the first draft feels amazing, doesn't it?
It does.
You're writing it and you're like, this is going to be awesome. It's so epic. And then you go back and you read it and you're like, I suck at this. Like, what the frick happened?
Dude, there are times where I'm writing.
It's not even the same story anymore when you go back and read through it again.
I'm powering through that story. My fingers on the keyboard are like the bullet shells hitting the ground, just so like just blowing through it. And I'm like, yeah, my description's on point. This is amazing. And then you guys have heard it. You've been here listening, and I'm like reading back what I wrote, and I'm like, what did I mean there? What was this? And then you're like, okay. And then Tyr's got a program now, right?
Yeah.
And then you find out how many times you
screwed something up.
Something up.
Well, it's a very analytic program that breaks down things on a really minute level.
I mean,
it looks handy. I wouldn't mind playing with it.
Sure.
What's it called?
It's called Pro Writer's Aid. Yeah. Something like that.
And it's supposed to plug into various other programs, but we haven't quite tinkered with that aspect.
Yeah, it's supposed to Writing Aid. It's supposed to integrate into Google Docs and stuff.
But basically, if you're using Word and it highlights things, this will show you the other things that it didn't catch.
By the way,
yes, much more in depth.
We are not at all being paid to talk about this program in any way. They don't even know that we're talking about this program.
Yeah, you guys kind of just jumped ahead, though, because we're not quite there yet.
We are for sale.
Yes,
we are for sale.
We are indeed whores. So, if you'd like us to talk about your book or your product or your services or something like that,
which are all amazing,
we have a price, and it's cheap. So, hit us up. You can even just message us on Twitter at @thedarkstormyk1, or you can reach us through. You can probably reach us through the website, can't you?
Yeah, I mean, if they dig around,
Twitter's probably the easiest way, but yeah.
Yeah, Twitter. Well, I mean, they can reach out to either Vigvasir or Dark and Stormy on Twitter.
So, yeah, hit us up. We'll talk about your product. We'll review it if you want us to honestly talk about it, or if you want us to lie. It's okay.
Nice.
No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
Or talk about just the good parts.
Yeah, just the good parts, the highlights, if you will. So, yeah, no, we jumped ahead on it a little bit. But
we did. This is kind of... so, in the last editing episode, we did the big story changes, right? We went back and reworked a few things, made some changes, smoothed over some plot holes.
Well, and that's going to cascade a little bit, right? So,
right. It'll
well, we created our own holes as we went along, and we had a...
Hank
we smoothed it out, right.
Hank and Bill are going to
right, and it's far
places.
from finished, but our listeners don't want to hear every little detail that we changed.
And we're not going to torture you like
So
that.
this week we're kind of doing...
kind of.
Yeah, we're talking more about the
we're
process
kind of doing
than the book itself.
Oh,
We're
look at that.
right.
Your program caught that.
Right. We're doing more polishing this time. This time we're going into the finer levels, and we're talking about sentence structure and passive voice and polishing, our work here. Not that kind of polishing.
Should we start off with this thing that Loki sent us?
Some editing advice?
Yes.
Yeah, why don't you guys
So,
work through that, and then I had
I
a
don't
few more
buy
things to
this
add.
whole thing. Okay,
No,
I don't agree
either.
with all the points
Yeah, that's
or
the
even
thing
the
is
cases they
you
give.
You can look up all the editing advice in the world, and not all of it's going to apply.
I mean,
most
yeah,
of it's pretty
the
obvious,
greats
but some
have
of it's
broken
pretty
most
good.
of these, so it's like,
yeah,
but
find what works
I gotta
for
keep
you.
in mind I am not one of the greats, and then maybe you follow the rules a
Yeah,
little more
but
until you are.
You got to take
Well,
the
that's the
advice
thing.
for what it is.
I like a good, strong set of rules until they don't apply. If it's in quotation, none of it applies.
I hate rules.
Okay?
I hate rules across the board.
And
Rules were
if
meant
they
to be
get in the
broken.
way of flow or just doing what I need to do, they go
Well,
out the window.
I think
Yeah,
while you're
exactly.
writing, you write. You know what I'm saying?
I
You
think it's
just-
important to know the rules.
Yeah, sure, but I'm saying while you're writing, you just write. You
I can't
just
work like that.
Get your story on paper.
I wish
and
I
then you
could.
go back later and you're like, all right,
Let's
how
put-
bad
yeah,
was
let's
I?
fix
But see,
this.
that's why I love buzz writing over buzz editing, because I don't edit. When I'm sober writing, I am editing everything to death to the point I forgot
You
where I was
never get anything
going.
written that way.
Right. Exactly.
That's what I'm saying. You just got to power through. It's better. It's like I tell my patients, I would rather have some information that's at the wrong times or in the wrong way or what have you than have no information at all. So in this case, I would rather have a book written.
It saves me a lot of work on the back end, but I have to get to the back end.
But so have the book written.
That's what she said.
Then go back and apply the rules if you can. And knowing the rules helps in the first place. Knowing the rules helps you to try and write by them while you're doing
Well,
it.
if it's instinctual and you don't even have to think about it, then it's not a problem that needs fixing.
But that's why you write every day. If you
Right.
write every day, you get used
That
to
helps,
it. It
yeah.
kind of becomes instinctual, right? You want to read us the first one?
All right, let's see.
I didn't bring my glasses, so
Oh, okay, great. Let's see. Okay, it was talking about, because you're going to be eventually giving this to an editor, you're going to want the double space. You're going to want 12-point font. Mine always defaults to 11, but apparently 12 is still the standard. They're talking about using Times New Roman or Arial. I don't even have Times New Roman.
what?
What,
Yeah.
really?
I'm serious. It just isn't in
Oh,
Word.
you're right. Yeah, I have a program.
It used to be, but it isn't
that
in the version I
doesn't
have.
it on my phone. It doesn't
Really?
have Times New
Well, I
Roman.
see that Arial's the new standard because when the internet was younger and data mattered before we had nearly infinite servers out there, the character bit of Times New Roman was much more complex and had more data in it than Arial does. So Arial kind of became the new standard because it's just cheaper. It's more
So
efficient.
basically, this first part is about formatting your
So
work.
I would say Times New Roman just sounds like something out of the early 90s. I think it's no
It-
longer probably true.
Also, what you need to check here is if you're planning on querying, you need to see what your agents' preferences are, because there are a lot of
Right.
agents and publishers out there who do have a formatting requirement that it be 12-point Times New Roman.
And that's what they're kind of saying is that you might have all kinds of cool character sets, which I'd love to play with, but your editor might not. So when they port this over, it's not going to look the way that you have in mind. It might even,
Mess it up.
the formatting might go out the window.
Everything should be written in only papyrus.
If you're making Avatar Part 2, 3, 4, and 5.
The other thing is if
Or you're
you're
a law
doing
office.
Kindle self-publishing through Amazon, and you're going to use, they have a Kindle Create tool. That's kind of nice because you download this. It's basically an app, and you run your book, your manuscript or whatever, through this program, and it basically catches all of your chapters and everything, and that way when it downloads into Kindle and people buy your book, they can skip from chapter to chapter in the little
It creates a
table,
hyperlink
table of
situa-
contents
Okay.
and everything. Yeah.
I dig
So
that.
if you're gonna do that, it's gonna change your headers and all that stuff
Oh, yeah,
too.
hyperlinks are so
when,
nice.
when I read, I try and finish a chapter at a time. So it's like if I gotta put it down and come back later.
Well, you can bookmark and highlight. Kindles are amazing.
Yeah,
I know,
but
I
no,
love
but being
them
able
too.
like, it's
All
like,
those
oh, I finished
people-
on chapter 8. Now I can jump to chapter 9. You know.
Yeah.
I like
Well,
that.
I mean, it holds your place for the most part.
Yeah, it's not gonna just.
But if you want to
reset.
jump around, which I'm not saying I haven't, like, and there are times when, like, I'll, go back to an earlier part just to reread a section or something like that. So it's nice to have, and it's
Again,
nice
not
to
being
use when
paid.
you can.
I'm pretty old school. I tend to only read things on chiseled stone.
Right?
Well, I was gonna say, you know what's fun? It's a bit old school and a bit nerdy, but people that were alive in the '80s might remember these things. Choose your own adventures. They have a couple on the
So
Kindle.
hard.
And
They're so difficult
they're
to
fun.
write. To
Oh,
write.
oh
to
yeah,
write.
because it's branching trees.
You know,
I
yeah.
actually would love to do that as a challenge at one point. But my point is that on the Kindle, it's all hyperlink. It's so smooth. Because before you had to like find the page, hold it with your thumb because you died or got
died, go
abducted by
back.
aliens or something happened weird.
Or if you're like me, you're like, I'm going to tentatively make this decision,
Right,
and you
right,
hold
right,
your
right,
place
right,
so you
right.
can jump back and no, I really meant this one.
They're like, nope, back arrow.
No, I wasn't jumping in the lava pit. No, that's not what I meant. Don't be ridiculous.
So yeah, it's cool for all that stuff. All right, so let's move on. What was the second one?
Start strong.
Oh yeah. Okay. This is talking about opening with action, right?
Sure.
Okay. Well, the best example I can think of, I can't remember which one, and maybe a third or fourth one. It was early on in the Dresden series. There's like 17 of these books, but the first line did two of the things that are suggested in here, and that's either intrigue with mystery or start with action, and it does both in one sentence. The building was on fire, and it wasn't my fault.
Mm-hmm.
I need to know what the hell's going on now.
Yeah,
That is a great
that's a
opening
strong
line.
opening, right?
Or like that one song goes, the roof is on fire. No?
Yes.
Okay. Too much drinking, maybe.
No, but it immediately I was like, all right, I'm already in because I enjoy these books. But if I
Did-
wasn't, I would be in.
Okay, do you think we have enough of that in our story? Did we? Did
Our
we
story
bang enough?
starts.
It starts with the
with-
fire.
It's no, well,
Almost.
Yeah, but our
in the
hook
first
isn't
scene.
there, right? We
No,
don't-
our story starts with the farmer, with Miller on the phone calling our team because there is a cult in his barn.
Do we need to start stronger? Do you think? Do we need our
All right,
first
hold
sentence to
on.
be
Let me go back up to chapter 1 here, and I can read it to
be
you.
a fist in the ass?
Really? That's where we're going?
I mean,
I'm just riffing here.
All right.
it's
so
at least within the first paragraph, right?
here's what it says. Rain beat against the barn, tapping out its angry pattern and demanding the attention of its unlikely occupants. The wind howled through the night, silenced only by the rolling thunder that overshadowed all else, and a bright flash of lightning split the otherwise pitch-dark night, momentarily illuminating the robed figures inside.
It is intriguing.
Okay, the rope figures got me.
It is intriguing. I'll give it intrigue.
Well, I
Okay.
mean, it's
so maybe not
atmospheric.
bang, but intrigue.
It doesn't quite, but it's
So the
okay. And the
reason-
atmospheric's kind of
let
like
me
a lot of
explain.
stories do that.
Yes, I get it.
You get
It
it?
was a dark and stormy
It was a
night.
dark and stormy
Right,
night.
right, of course.
That's why I started it
Yeah,
that way.
and I can't fault you at all. But no, what I'm saying is that like many stories start off like that. So I was like, yeah, it's nicely written. It doesn't bother me,
I thought
but
it
it
was
does it
being funny.
intrigue. Yeah, but then you got hooded figures. So I'm
But
like,
that's
okay,
the
I'm
thing, is
interested now.
I tend to write things like that, and then nobody gets it. So I don't know.
No, I picked up on that.
Okay.
So so we do have bang. So or intrigue at least. So some
Intrigue.
Yeah,
Yeah.
something to pull them in. So yeah. Now my personal book, I start with 3 consecutive bangs. So I have a realizing the Earth was destroyed, followed by a terrorist attack, and
The only problem with starting with a bang is it tends to lead to backflashes.
So
oh,
I
no, I
actually
tell all mine in
started.
a moment.
I started book 2 of my Justice series with what you think is kind of a sweet little, thought of someone watching your back, guardian angels, fate, something like that. And then Justice deciding that if she has one of those, she can't wait till she's dead so she can get her hands on him. so I mean,
You're
yeah, sometimes-
incompetent.
right, exactly.
You son of a bitch.
So sometimes, yeah, there's a lot of different ways to kind of start with a little bit of intrigue.
Okay.
Okay, now the third point was one you hear a lot, and it's show versus tell, or show don't tell.
Right.
Which is kind of what our show is.
Yeah, it was. We originally were writing advice through the vehicle story, and largely became story with writer advice in it.
Well, because I thought, and I don't know if you guys agree or not, but I thought it'd be better because we were being a little, I felt preachy in some points, and I don't think it was deserved. The realistic, what I realized was probably the better vehicle was actually doing it all.
Oh, no,
You know
no,
what I'm saying?
I don't disagree with that.
And showing what it was
It's
like
just the
doing.
emphasis
So
altered along the
if
way.
y'all stick with us, we're going to go through each part of the process. So this was a little bit of editing, and we're also going to try and pitch the story and enter one of those pitch contests and talk to an editor and a publisher and an agent and all that.
So yeah, querying and all that.
As
stuff.
interesting
So-
as we can make the
Oh,
highlights
and
week
then
to week.
also, advertising and
Right.
whatnot.
All the things that you may have to do if you write a book. So
Right.
we're going to try and do that with you, so you can kind of get a feel for it. And we'll even post the resources we find. So stick with
Absolutely.
us. Those will be at the darkandstormynights.bigbusiermedia.com once we post them.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, go ahead, guys.
So,
I'm
yeah,
sorry.
So he was talking about.
If I can cut in here because we
Oh,
keep
go ahead.
saying he, and I don't know that we mentioned
Go
who
with
this
they.
article. So it's
I
actually
actually have no idea.
a Ryan G. Van Cleve. He's a writing teacher and author. And so this is an
So
article.
he has cred.
Yeah, this is an article that he's
Word.
written, and I really like his example of show versus tell here. So I think that if you can go ahead and read the actual
All right.
excerpt there, I just wanted to make sure we gave him credit.
No, I
for-
appreciate that.
Yeah.
He hated his neighbor. Versus, Roger spent night after night wishing his neighbor a slow slide down a 10-foot razor blade. So a
It's
little bit
pretty
of
colorful.
internal dialogue,
Into a pool of salt and lemon juice.
Delightful. I
Hey.
mean, that's how I like
Loki
to spend
added
my
the
nights.
last.
I did. I've been there. I've been that guy. I've
Yeah.
been like, oh, God. Just
No, I agree. Because you can feel it, and he never said he hated his neighbor, but I think he figured that out.
Right.
unless you found that personal act, that act personally pleasurable, then,
I mean,
Might
it
be
could be a
strange,
gift
yeah,
if
but-
that's the community's in.
So- I try not to judge.
As long as both participants are willing, let's
Consent is the key.
So he also says to give colors and smells and tastes and textures to make sure that they're feeling your scene.
So
Right.
yeah, I was literally just given the advice: try to use all 5 senses.
Not at the same time.
Senses if possible. Of course, not at the same time.
It's
He
boring.
smell, tasted.
No. Earlier on, like,
You
high
have
school
to
or
weave
something.
it throughout a scene where it doesn't get obvious.
Sure, but a scene isn't one sentence.
But the thing is that I played with this notion of, like, can I fill all 5 senses? And when you put yourself in that headspace, you find yourself writing from a different direction or coming with different things that are sometimes pretty good, but you don't need all 5.
For
2
me,
of them, 3 of them, maybe 1
I
of them.
agree.
But try writing all
Enough-
5 and just keep what's good.
my thought is, and you guys have come after me on some of this, but my thought has always been enough to paint the scene, and that's it.
Right.
Don't over-explain. Let the reader fill in for themselves, and they will.
Right, but are all 5 senses possible? For instance, I was writing a fight scene.
Well, it depends on the context, but yeah. I mean, you're not
where-
licking the guy,
where
are
the
you?
hero was getting blood. No, but
Taste of blood.
the taste of blood, right? So where they had gotten punched in the face and they could smell iron and taste blood, and so those were senses. I was like, of course you're thinking about the pain
The hard bone of his
and
cheek.
the ringing in his ear.
Yeah, no, I love it when you break it down to those minute details.
Yeah.
You know, I don't need the scent so much. I don't really feel like blood has a small scent. If it's
Oh, it
a
does.
vampire
it's
story,
kind of
sure.
coppery.
But the taste is coppery. So yeah, if it's in your mouth, absolutely that metallic kind of
Well,
taste.
I don't
to
know
it.
if a strong enough taste is in your mouth, or if a strong enough scent is
It
in your
feels
nose,
like it's
you can
hitting
taste
both.
it,
But
or
truly, if you mention one or the other, don't you feel like your readers got it?
maybe it depends.
I don't know. That
Especially
immediately
there might
sucked
be a
me into the
contrast.
narration of Fight
We
Club.
have very
and I
different
loved all of
opinions.
those.
Yeah, yeah,
we
yeah.
have very different opinions on this, and it's very obvious
Well,
in the
no,
way
no.
that we write.
Well, yeah, but
Oh, I don't always give it all, and I really should. But for me, like I
No,
said,
you really shouldn't.
I build out.
no.
I start with a very small frame and build a bigger story on top of it.
I feel I need to explain. I'm a growing writer. Okay,
He's the growing boy.
we all are. But my point is, when I was first writing, me and Loki have very similar things we think we're doing versus what we're actually doing. You know, like we see this great visual in our head and don't always put it on paper. Or, you know, we swear we describe something when we laid almost nothing out. You know, and over the years, I've tried to improve on that and sometimes gone too far and had to dial back. And what I wanted to give was a quick example.
Well, you kill your pace if you go too far.
That's what I'm trying to say.
That's what
I
I'm saying,
totally
too.
agree with Tier, but I think that where we draw the line is just in different
But
places.
can you? That's the
Yeah.
thing, though. I have seen, like you mentioned, Fight Club, and not. I don't think the book did
Well,
as
it's a
good
narrative
job
heavy.
as the movie did, or
Yeah,
what have
the
you.
book's okay.
Where it goes a few frames. You know what I'm saying? So you get a frame that kind of displays the look and the feel, and then a couple frames later the taste and the smell. You know what I'm saying? It kind of breaks it apart.
Yeah.
Throughout the entirety of the scene.
As long as you can keep it flowing, by all means, go for it.
Right, and
paint that picture.
to where you get an action-packed blow by blow that slowly reveals
And you
the
have to
entirety
remember, just like every other piece of advice that we're giving here, just like every other part of your story, is that every reader has their own preferences. Writing,
Oh, of course.
it's subjective.
Sure.
You know, not everybody has the same preferences. Some people feel that the description should be a little lighter. Some people feel it should be heavier. So I
I've
mean,
gotten both reactions back on on the same
on the
piece
same
of writing.
You're not
piece.
going to make everyone happy.
Yeah, where
And
one
that's the
person's like, "There's
thing.
not enough description." The other person's like, "You're too
Too much
description heavy."
I've
And
had
it's
the
just like,
same feedback.
Okay, which the hell is it?
Right. No, that's
you
the
wanna
same
keep
thing I
the
dealt
flow
with from my
going.
beta readers was that they wanted more detail, but at the same time told me it was too descriptive, and I'm like, you can't have both.
Right.
So
Well, that's the thing. Is
it's hard. It is hard.
You want to keep pacing moving, but at the same time, you don't want people just floating in a void. You want to actually summon an image.
Yeah. So you have to find
So
like a
let's-
happy medium of painting the scene and not slowing down the story.
Let's summon the second part of this in a little bit.
Sounds good.
Dear listener, we accept that we had to sacrifice the whole Saturday for your entertainment, but we think you'd be crazy to miss an episode of The Dark and Stormy Nights. The world sees writers as they want to see them, in the simplest terms and the most convenient definitions. But what we found out is that each of us is a brain
And a dreamer.
And a creator,
and a basket case.
a researcher.
And a comedian.
Does that answer your question? Sincerely yours, The Dark and Stormy Nights.
Listen to Dark and Stormy.
All right, folks, I'm 6 drinks in,
Oh, no.
and we're on number
Right.
4.
You are correct. Which was read it out loud.
I'm able to still count, so that's a good thing.
So basically,
I will
what you have written, what you have spell checked and grammar checked, seems fine until you try to read it to another human being.
Have you heard
It's
it on
really
the show?
not.
Have you heard it on the show? Have you listened as I've tried to read something back?
And I
I'm
don't
like,
mean just like,
what did I mean here? What was this?
and don't read it like a dictionary, but like try and inhabit that character. See, you know, because then you'll see like, oh, you needed a comma there, or while I spelled the correctly, I meant they. You know.
And that's the thing is this is actually something that I had written as well, for like typos and minor wording issues and things like that, either out loud or in a different format.
In front of
Because-
people, pets, something. In front of something helps.
I'm not quite sure my dog is going to help that much.
Children, unsuspecting victims. Go to the bar. They expect that stuff.
Print it out, change the colors, do something to kind of make it not look exactly the same. Like, I think that is the biggest thing. For me, like, nothing points out a typo faster than hitting publish on Amazon.
Yeah.
So, hey, if that's what it takes, you're going to want to download it and read
You
it
know,
again because there is
Sending
something
that email,
there.
that text. What did I just do?
And it doesn't matter how many people you had read it before you hit publish, there's something there.
People are the worst.
Yeah.
Like, I just know, look, I know that once mine's done, I can trust you guys for the most part or whatever, but you're going to miss stuff too. You know?
Oh yeah,
You're
of course.
just never going to catch everything. I
Yeah.
mean,
And then somebody somewhere is going to be like, oh, they misspelled a word.
Well,
There's
between
150,000 words in here, and they misspelled one. You know?
assholes.
Between two different programs, though, Well, 3 actually, and the
But
3
they
of us. I
can't-
hope to God we get
They're
most.
not going to catch a
Well, not
word
most,
that
but
isn't
there's always gonna
misspelled
be
because it's
right.
just the
There's
instead
always
of
going to be
there.
something.
Or
Right,
and
right,
that's
right.
the whole point in the reading it out loud or changing the format or something. For some reason, me having because my colors are switched on my Kindle.
Oh yeah, yeah. It makes it
So-
so much easier
right,
to read at
it's a
night.
Was
black-
it night mode?
It's a black background
black-
with
yeah,
white words, and for some
Yeah. And
a
reason
soft
that makes
white.
it so much easier
Night
for me
mode's
to.
the best.
Yeah.
Oh,
so
God, it's
even
so
if you
great.
download your what is it like a Mobi format or something, so that you can load it onto your Kindle and read it through that way, that might even be something that helps.
I see.
Okay, the number 5 was saying trust said, which was basically like there's nothing wrong with saying said. I completely disagree with every part of this entire number 5.
I don't
I hated-
disagree completely. There's nothing wrong with said, but there's also a bunch of other ways to say
I mean,
said.
you can say said, and you can say said tersely, said angrily, yeah, or you can say any number of different things. And he
I've
gives
been told
some
don't do
examples.
that
Some of
too,
them are
though.
good, some are bad. But whatever.
Don't do what?
Like
Don't
really-
describe said.
Yeah, don't describe said.
There's
Now,
probably a better way to say it if you have to.
I disagree with it. I mean,
He said in a terse fashion.
Well, yeah. I mean, you want to know how they said something. I
You
think
do,
that-
but no. My point was that this is another thing that I had listed as well was something we said like spoke quietly versus whispered. There's a better way to say it.
Sure.
You don't need to
well,
say
yeah,
it
that's why
quite
instead
that
of
way.
saying
Leave said off.
he spat the words.
Right,
Or,
right.
Well, that's why these rules are made to be broken. They're guidelines. That's all they are.
But yeah,
Exactly.
that's what I say. So said is okay. if-
dialogue
if all he
text,
did was
yeah.
say it. But
I think the real key is
did
let's-
he have some venom behind it?
there
or?
is nothing worse than seeing a dialogue where it goes, Jenny said this, and Bob said that, and then Jenny said this. Like, oh my God, I just want to blow my brains out. If it's reading like a stage play,
Well, you don't do that either. I mean, if they're just saying back and forth, then I just put the line, space, the line,
right.
space. You
You don't
what I'm
need any description
saying?
at that
Right
point.
after you've established the order of conversation, then you can just go into.
Right, but I'm just saying overusing the word said when you're
Or put
saying
some
nothing
action
else.
in between or something
Sure.
like that. Yeah.
Make it crunchy.
I mean, I try to vary my
And
words
if you have more
as
than two
much as
people
it
in a
makes sense to.
conversation, for Christ's sake, just make sure people know who's talking.
Oh yeah, it gets confusing. It's a
It
lot
can.
harder to just put line space, line space, line space. You kind of have to,
I actually find it hard
remind them who's talking when.
to say nothing. Like I have to try and force myself to say nothing after a quotation because it's too easy to constantly describe what's being said and how it's being said, and it doesn't always have to be done.
Well, and I've read some of
I
these.
mean, it just has to feel natural
I've read some of these
and clear.
conversations that they try to mark as like the benchmark of the way conversations are written, like Pride and Prejudice and stuff like that. And I found them utterly boring, and in some cases, completely confusing as to who was talking when.
I mean, that's like 18th century literature, so I mean...
That's a rough comparison to things right now.
I
you know?
agree, but some people are like, "Oh, this is the benchmark of how conversation should be written." Yeah, it's not really that great.
It just doesn't compare to what most
And
people
who's
are
saying
writing
this?
these days.
Is this a professor or is this someone
No,
who's
it's
getting
always some
published?
literature snob.
I
Because
mean,
in
I'd
the
rather
end,
listen to an editor.
Every English professor, writing professor, whatever that I've ever had in the end, after they're done telling you all the rules, says, "But you're gonna break them, and it'll be just fine." Like in the end, they know
There
you're
are some
going to
people,
break the
like
rules.
for me, anybody who is so overly rigid in their, I don't know,
Style?
requirements out of what other people put in their books.
Oh.
To me, you're just looking for validation.
They're deferred Nazis.
The people who are like so anti prologue or anti dialogue tag or
I just had it
anti
out this week about that.
yeah, like that's my thing is like if you are so freaking rigid in your preferences on how a book should be, a book that you didn't write,
Right.
a book that somebody
Well-
else wrote, that you open a book, see the word prologue and slam it closed without even giving it a chance. To me, that like
I get it.
I
So-
seriously
no.
wonder.
Look.
I wonder if you need validation to the extent that everybody else on the planet
At-
must write just like you in order for
At
you
the
to
end of the
verify
long
that or
conversation,
validate their writing.
at the end of the long conversation about the prologue, I came to understand that it wasn't about the prologue itself, but rather about the fact that the prologue is so often misused by bad writers as
Sure.
an information dump. Okay.
So it's
But they're not
it's a
giving
litmus
the writer
test.
a
so
chance.
because
Right.
because some people are misusing it, nobody can use it. which is ridiculous.
Yeah,
It is ridiculous.
Blanket rules are just inherently bad.
That's what I say. Somebody, what if this prologue is really good? What if this prologue is being used exactly as a prologue is supposed to be used? Are you going to be a dick about that? Of course you are, because you've already determined
You're right,
that the
right.
prologue is evil. It isn't about the fact that the writer was bad in that time you disliked the prologue. You know what I'm
Right.
saying?
It has nothing to do with the writer. It has nothing to do with the story. It has nothing to do with the prologue. It has to do with the fact that this person refuses to accept that a good prologue can exist because other people have done prologues badly.
Exactly. Yeah.
That does
Those
not
are the same,
make sense.
That same mentality is that there's no such thing as a good relationship because I had one bad relationship, or that I can't have a decent donut because the donut I had last Tuesday was bad. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's just...
It feels like an English teacher who has a lot of papers and doesn't actually want to read it all.
Maybe.
And as soon as he sees prologue, just goes B-, whatever. I'm moving on.
like, my thing is just, I don't know. Like, are you jumping through hoops to make sure that your book never has a prologue, never needs a prologue? Like, what are you reworking in your story that you are so diligently making sure that
I
a
think the
prologue
key
could not possibly be squeezed in there? And are you really making your book better?
I
Right.
think the key is what you said before, in that, there are sometimes better ways to say things. So when you find yourself running against one of these things, like, should you be doing that, or is there a better way to do that?
There is a better way
when
to
you
do
have
a prologue, a lot
prologue,
of times.
did you need it? And if you did,
And that's
then you needed
great.
it.
Sure.
That's
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah. No,
Sure.
that's exactly it.
But
There's
for
many
me,
times
backflash is not always better than a prologue. In fact, I most often prefer the prologue.
I don't like using
And
backflashes
again-
personally. They don't. In fact, in my story currently, I have 0 backflashes.
Right, and you do tend to prefer things in a linear fashion.
I do.
Right?
I'm very linear. And my prologue is entirely, yes, it's a chapter. It's just like the rest
Right.
of the book, except it takes place 5 years before the rest of the
For
book.
me, most of the time, when I read a prologue, it feels natural to read that and then continue. It's usually a jump in time. And I feel like that's
Yeah.
most often why people will include a prologue. It's because there's some event
Right.
that is not in the same time
It's an
frame
inciting
as the rest of
incident
the story.
before the rest of the story.
Right.
And I think it
So-
bears in mind saying that while it is a spaghetti western or space opera, it is just pop. It's written modeling Joseph Campbell's monomyth, the story arc, the stereotypical thing that we now write all scripts against. The most famous, one of the most beloved movies of all time, has a giant yellow scrawling prologue. Star Wars
Doesn't every Star Wars start with one?
Oh God, it's
Yeah.
it's talk about trite, overdone.
Doesn't Conan start with it too?
Yes, but it was the '80s, so
Yeah.
But the
and
point,
that was a perfect movie in many ways.
the point I was trying to make is that most often it feels much more natural and acceptable to read that earlier scene in a prologue than it does later in the story where you're trying to squeeze a backflash in. And to me, it feels more like an information dump at that point
Right, yeah.
than it does if
Why
you
is it
had
any different, right?
It's not any different. It's not. And to me, it's more noticeable. It stands out more as a backflash than it would have
In
had you
fact,
just included the prologue.
Sometimes as a backflash, it feels like, oh, and we forgot to tell you about this.
Right.
Look.
And or sometimes it almost feels like, oh, well, you're changing the story by including this.
Right.
Whereas at the beginning, it would have just felt like part of the story all
Yes,
along.
and that's why I don't like
So-
backflashes. It feels like we're retconning
guess it
something.
depends.
Not always.
It depends on your writing and where it
Sometimes
fits.
It does. And sometimes it can fit in naturally. And that's great. But most often for me, I prefer a prologue to a backflash. And if it's necessary to the story, just freaking put it in and
Okay.
ignore the lit
We have
snobs.
long
Right.
had a tradition of shitting on exposition, and by we I mean humanity, not just us. Okay, but the fact is that at some point in the book there's going to be exposition. The trick is, have you hidden it so well that people lap it up and actually love it, as versus seeing it as a lecture? That's the trick. I mean,
yeah, it shouldn't feel too exposition-y. That's true.
I mean, the
Well,
entire
but that's
book
what-
is an
but
exposition.
That's the whole point. Look,
You knew nothing, now you know this. I mean,
is the prologue being used right? Okay, it shouldn't be obvious exposition. That's it. It's really what it is.
We're harping on prologues, but I feel like this was like
It
a
should
general
be-
statement about all like hard rules.
yeah.
Like there is no absolute.
But that's the thing, though. All we're talking about here, though, is sometimes the rules are made to stop bad writing, but they don't.
right.
You know, bad writing's bad writing. That's just
Right, and you shouldn't manipulate your writing to fit through hoops on fire because somebody else said so.
But
you
I will
know?
tell you, we lost followers over my
I think it's
rant
good
about
practice, though, to try. Because it's like a muscle. I think that no, it develops a certain discipline, and you find creative ways of doing it. And if it doesn't work, then don't do it. But I'm saying it's worth trying. I'm not saying conform your text.
Consider it, sure.
But don't pull it out of hand.
Look, so a lot of people will say if it could be chapter 1, your prologue should be chapter 1. Okay. Like I said, I don't personally use my prologue as chapter 1 because it's 5 years before the rest of the story, and the rest of the story takes place in a linear fashion. Okay.
Right.
So, and that's why it's not separate. If it's not just exposition, there is some information in it that is essential to the rest of the story, therefore exposing certain pieces of information you're going to need, but it is not exposition. It is story. You know what I'm saying? So it doesn't feel like exposition, but I have read prologues that are just pretty much, this happened before, the apocalypse and machines rose, and that's just
right.
A story before the story to explain the story.
Yeah, and that's the problem.
Right.
But I mean, there's examples of great literature that are guilty of all these things.
You know what, though? Also, I feel like sometimes that's a writer who's not confident in the fact that if they just jump into it, their reader will catch up.
There are some confusing worlds, though.
That's a good point. I think that needs to be highlighted.
No, you're right. You're absolutely right. But there are some confusing worlds that did getting the exposition dump of what happened to the world.
But can you do it as you go along?
Makes sense. Well, okay. If you jumped into Mad Max 2, not understanding that the bombs dropped and the world was forever changed.
Which one was Mad Max 2? Because Mad Max 1 wasn't even Mad Max; it was Road Warrior.
Well, Mad Max 1, he was a cop.
Yeah.
Before the fall of
Warrior.
mankind.
Yeah.
Right. Mad Max 2. What?
I think it was just Mad Max. I don't
might
know.
Have been Mad Max. Well, anyways, either way, the world went to shit because of.
Yeah, but they didn't explain any of that. It was actually like 2 different movies, but they just had the same character.
No, they explained it. Yeah.
Did they?
Yeah.
It didn't seem that well written, but all right.
But it's like I don't know.
It's 80s Australian movies.
You're like,
here's the question: what you need
you
to
wouldn't
ask.
be like, what happened?
Oh my God! Yeah, time to cut off my alcohol. Anyway, here's the question that you need to ask: is okay. So, in your example of it's the future and there's robots and it's post-apocalyptic and blah blah blah, which kind of sounds a little like Matrix.
Or
but
to all those who had the 3.5
anyway,
hour collections.
If you just jump into it and you start telling a story about this person and running into robots and how the state of the world as it is now, is your reader going to be able to catch up and follow along? Or do you really need that this is how it all started scene,
Yeah, it's hard to say. I think in some okay, so if you're in some weird fantasy scenario that has nothing to do with Earth or something like that, then it is what it is. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think they'll figure it out when there's 2 moons or something.
Right. Whereas if you are like the Earth went to shit and then this is the
I gotta tell you, I wrote a post-apocalyptic, a dystopian. I didn't explain. There's no prologue telling you how the world went to shit.
You remember I've got the one dystopian thing, but the whole idea
that could actually be the mystery. I mean,
I got the one post-apocalyptic thing that
you figure it out as you go along.
Right.
Sorry.
I'm done. What's next?
You don't want to finish your sentence?
Nope, I'm done.
Avoid adverbs.
Oh, you're further than me? Okay. Anything to say?
Oh, no. I skipped avoid stage directions.
You skipped stage directions.
Yeah, sorry. Avoid stage directions.
I wholeheartedly agree with this one. This is the whole, and in fact, I think I have a little comment about this in the list I made as well. Limit descriptions of things that are assumed. We know your character's breathing. They don't need to walk from point A to point B every single time. Limit it to when it's actually needed.
Now, when I was reading through this, I'm like, who would write like this? And I'm not going to even read it to you because it's so boring and ridiculous the way it's even written.
Right.
But I do know there was one thing I had written that was somewhat like this, and that was a combat scene where this one guy's taking on like 3 different people, and I'm actually like trying to figure out how to describe to the reader the action sequence that would be much better filmed. And I had a real struggle of like demonstrating it without boring the crap out of you with what should be combat. You know what I mean?
Combat should be mildly vague.
But you go too vague and
Fight
it's like,
scenes are hard,
it just
though.
sounds stupid.
No, you can say that he broke her, like he broke her elbow with a chop or something like that, or kicked out her knee, whatever it is. You can say shit like that, but you don't need to go like
his left arm blocked and then his right.
Yeah, you don't need every detail. What I was even saying is probably a little too far. You know what I'm saying? I mean, give the bloody punctuations. You know what I'm saying? Don't bother with the sentences.
I hate writing fight scenes. I had to write quite a few for the Cost of Justice, and like honestly, there was one fight where she got into a fight with somebody she knew who fought dirty. And that one was ridiculous. There was freaking hair pulling and nipple twisting and all sorts of shit.
Right,
and
but
it was they're hard to write. I just hate writing
just
fight
give the
scenes.
things that punctuate. So you can say it was a flurry of blows, but then
right, and
throw
I
in
used
something,
and then you still have to throw in like minute little descriptions. Again, the taste of blood and like the sounds and stuff around you of like anyone nearby and sirens, dogs barking, the crowd.
You occasionally slow down long enough to describe a blow, but for the most part,
right, almost like that dazed moment where they're recovering.
Right, yeah.
Well,
time does in a fight. Time does slow down in specific points for the fighter, right? But overall, you're kind of working an instinct. That's why they train the way they do.
Right, but I do think that, like, say you have like a, semi-professional boxer going against, say, a martial artist. There might be something in the language of the description that suggests that style without saying the guy was a boxer and this guy's a martial artist.
No, you're going to...
the guy comes at him with a haymaker and the other,
you're going to describe the deft grace of the martial artist and the brute force of the
That's kind of what I'm saying, yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So the boxer's going to be able to hit the martial artist and knock him across the ring.
Yeah.
Whereas the martial artist is going to be able to deliver
Grapple
a fury of blows
him.
or disarm him quickly. And that's what you have to kind of look at. Watch them. That's the great thing about UFC is that you can actually see that matchup and see the way that they...
Yeah, when they're not busy doing ground game.
Ground game's the worst, but they do it. But almost every fight inevitably goes there.
I know.
And it's boring as shit. That's why I hated Hoist Gracie. Arguably one of the best fighters of our time. And he was so boring to watch because it was all ground game. But it's likely what's going to happen in your fight. So...
Unless they have a weapon.
Research, buddy. I love fights. I love watching fights. I love writing about
I don't need to
fights.
research. I've lived them.
I love them. In fact, like I said, my book and the one book I'm writing starts with a fight between 3 mechs and 100 soldiers.
Okay, that I can't research.
So, but I've seen the way robots fight. So
you have?
Yeah. They've got robot fighters and stuff like that. There's some cool shit out there. But and then versus a human in full body armor and stuff like that. It's a cool visual, but it's a lot faster and a lot less description than you think it is. So just nobody needs all those details.
Well, that's what I'm saying. You got to give just enough, and
yes,
where that line
highlights. Yes, be the announcer. Think about that. Be the announcer at ringside. Don't be, trying to describe every single thing.
Because that sounds like a throwaway. But anybody in the audience who, you're obviously listening. Seriously, dwell on that for a moment. And I'm not a sports guy, but I mean, I've inadvertently heard plenty of broadcast. And sports on radio, I cannot imagine anything more boring. And they try with all their might to make this exciting. But their description is very minimal because the action's constantly changing. Especially like basketball.
Yeah, they just give the highlights. A line drive to right field, Kipnis misses the catch or whatever.
No, I feel like listening to football on the radio is, I don't know, it's pretty. You can imagine everything that's happening with what they're telling you.
But that's what I'm saying. But they're using very sparse language.
They're not telling you about everything everybody's doing.
He snaps.
They're telling you about
the
action pieces, the stuff that matters.
Tackles. Oh, he flipped over this guy.
Right, but then they'll throw out like the yard lines. He's on the 20,
right.
the 10.
Okay, now watch a fight. They're not going to tell you about every blow that did nothing. They're not going to tell you about the missed hits, unless the missed hit was such a
blows
botch.
that all missed.
Right, or unless they're telling you about a missed hit that was such a botch that it gave the other guy an advantage.
Oh, like he overswings. And
right.
Yeah.
Allowing him to catch that hit and deliver a haymaker.
But that's actually good advice. I like that. So I might actually take that up and start like taking some notes off of some sportscasts because that actually, I think that would actually be useful.
We'll come back with more in a little bit.
Our merchandise brings all the boys to the yard. Go see why on our website at thedarkandstormynights.home.blog.
All right, we're back.
And
Sorta.
silence. Thought you were going to say something.
I
We're
don't
going
know.
to jump in?
Sure.
All right. Next one is avoiding adverbs. Those pesky ly words.
So I think the biggest point here is that, because I don't follow this rule across the board at all, but the biggest point is that if you can skip the adverb and strengthen your verb, that's what you should be doing.
Can you give me an example? Because I'm having trouble visualizing this one.
Yes. Ran quickly versus dashed or sprinted. Obviously, dashed or sprinted is a stronger word to use over ran quickly. Or, like we said before, spoke quietly versus whispered. Obviously, you want to go with
I
whispered.
agree with the whispered, but quickly just sounds like a more common way to speak.
I do
It's-
think that speaking quietly and whispered are sometimes different things.
If you need the specification in there, then by all means use your adverb.
Okay, it's
I
something to
know.
bear in mind, but it's not something I really care about.
So would you say use
When
ad-
it's overdone,
Yeah, I
I think
suppose.
that's the point.
So-
Obviously, everybody uses adverbs.
would you say use adverbs sparingly?
I think that's the idea, yes.
Oh,
Sorry.
God.
I apologize. I'm drunk.
Okay,
Active versus passive voice.
this is a fun one that Grammarly yells at me a lot for.
So your new program complains about it too, doesn't it?
Oh, of course, because I use passive voice in my
I
my
haven't
writing.
seen it pop up in
All
Word
right,
in
give
a
us an
while.
example of this. Now, I know we've talked about this before.
So the idea is that when you are writing in active voice, I guess it's supposed to make your writing more
Punchy.
Yeah. So the idea is active voice is when the subject does something. Passive voice is when the subject is acted upon. And the example that we had used was Odin pet Fenrir is active voice versus Fenrir was petted by Odin is passive voice.
Okay, so somebody doing something versus something being done to somebody.
To the subject, yeah.
But what if your main character is having something done to them? Is that not okay?
You're not going to eliminate passive voice 100% of the time, I don't think, and still have a natural sounding narrative.
Yeah, I think her point is that if Odin is the subject, then he should lead.
Right, but that's not always going to be the case.
And I agree. And I don't think it can be completely avoided.
It's not. There's at no point have I ever tried to completely eliminate it from any one of my books. Sometimes it is just the more natural
Yeah.
way to say something, and sometimes trying to rework it just doesn't make it flow right. You know?
Yeah,
mean,
like
I
it might be
always-
more technically correct, but somehow
Right.
it's wrong.
So I always tend to write from the perspective of my leading character. Now my leading character tends to be the aggressor. You know, they tend to be the one affecting change in the world. I write a lot of coyotes and foxes and stuff like that. So, you know, they are the ones causing change in the world. Occasionally, as happens to coyotes and foxes, things happen to them as a consequence of what they do. You know? So it's like, but it's still their perspective. You know what I'm saying? So it has to be passive voice, I think, when that happens, because
Sure.
it is their story.
Here's the other thing is that every time I've had like a beta reader or somebody or an editor tell me, you know, this is passive voice, try correcting it too. Their example always starts with the subject. So it could be and end up being a paragraph where every sentence starts with she if I change it to their suggestion.
Oh,
you know what
God,
I'm
that'd
saying?
be so tedious.
Right, and that redundancy is absolutely noticeable, more so than passive voice for me. Yeah, maybe
Right.
you're catching passive voice in a book. Are you really looking for that? Are you?
Oh,
You know
yeah.
what I'm saying? Like, but noticing that every single sentence starts with she or the name of your character, that's absolutely
Right.
noticeable.
I've
Or-
read
or
those
one or the
stories too.
other.
I've read that shit where it's just like, oh my God, stop.
Right. Like I had a paragraph where
Sorry.
like I don't remember 5 of the 8 sentences all started with the character or a pronoun for the character.
Right, and it's
And it
something that's
just-
difficult to avoid,
It's
but
just tedious, and it's like,
yeah, if you're
can I
trying
change
to
any of this? Because I hate this.
And
I
I
will
I
take
wasn't
I will
able to
take
do a lot.
passive voice over that every time.
and I don't know if this is a good or a bad thing,
not
but
every
I've
time.
neutralized my pronouns to they. So,
Right.
you know, I no longer so much use he or she.
That was something else I wanted to talk to you guys about in relation to
Wait.
our story as well.
So I almost don't use he or she in my stories anymore. It's they.
That seems bizarre to me. Like I understand it's culture we're in, but the English language is naturally gendered. I don't know why you'd do
No,
that.
there are some characters
Well, for
in
one,
my
one of my characters questions their sexuality.
Well, I think
right,
that's fair for them.
and I've had it. Yeah, I've had that in my stories as well, where there's not necessarily a gender associated to a character.
Jesus Christ. I just said them, and I was like, did I use that right?
So no, here was my thing as far as the steampunk comedy goes. Linda kind of started off as male in the plotting.
Linda
and
is
then
not a female. Linda is not a male nor a female.
It's a
Okay.
god.
So I don't
is
know
a they
how.
by definition.
I
Right,
don't
right.
know. Right. I don't know how we described it so much in the writing, but I know that when we discussed Linda, we switched pronouns back and forth, and I thought that we should define that.
I think technically she's omnigendered.
That's fine.
So
So then she should be referred to as they throughout
they
the story.
probably, yeah.
Okay, so that's something we'll have to make sure that we smooth out when in editing as well.
Okay.
Okay, that sounds good. Yeah, that's going to become, I think, more and more of a thing. And I don't.
I want to make
and-
sure that we're accurate with
Well,
it.
like I said, I think I've just gone and neutralized that
Mhm.
kind of thing in my story because it doesn't sound terrible. You know,
Yeah.
it was a little more work, I think, especially trying to reduce how often you use the pronoun instead of something else. You know, because they becomes repetitive and redundant. or
I know that,
whatever.
like, when I was taking Spanish and you'd see how the ending or, you know, the, el, la, any of that stuff, how gendered that language is. Like, why is this language so gendered? And then you look back at the English language and
Yeah, it's
you
the same.
you don't see it because you live in it. But,
Yeah.
oh, my God, is it gendered?
Yeah.
I think Spanish is a little more gendered than English
So is
is,
French.
but there are non-gendered
Well, because
languages
they
as well.
associate gender to like chairs and cats. You know what I'm saying?
Right, right.
Like,
This has a, well, I mean, you know, it's like the yin and yang. You know, this has a female energy and this has a male energy. Why? I have no idea, but the chair does.
But then there's
I
languages
feel like
with
the chair
no
doesn't though.
gendering.
What's that?
There are languages with no gendering. You know, in fact, there's I believe there's an African language that doesn't gender at all.
I'm curious
I've
how the
heard that as well.
translations sound.
Oh, so somebody actually did this. They took one of those non-gendered languages and then ran the translation through Google or whatnot.
And it gave male.
It gave
Back and
gender.
forth.
Yes, it gave gender based on what the sentence was.
Oh,
Interesting.
So it would be like the sentence was something along the lines of like they are a doctor, and Google would change it to he is a doctor, or they would say they are a teacher, and it would change it to she is a teacher. And so
Oh,
Yeah.
that could be really bad.
Google changed it, but it's not Google itself that did this. It changed it based on what people search, what people look up, what people write,
oh,
what
I
is
see.
within Google.
Yeah, because
so it's not
So
Google.
it's a stereotype based on
It's AI.
stereotype
actual-
based on what we put into Google,
Huh.
and it was completely sexist. It got much worse than what
Sort
I
of like
just
the
said.
AI bot that went insane and became a racist on Twitter.
Who
sounds
was it?
about right.
I forgot who it was. Somebody just made one. It's not really good for the show, but yeah, somebody purposely drove an AI insane.
That sounds like a terrible idea.
Yeah, well,
So-
they allowed
they see
it to
iRobot?
feed
'Cause
and
it's not a
learn
good
from
plan.
the users, and the users just, you know.
Yeah, they fed it like
Trolled
well,
it.
no, that's what it was. They fed it like Reddit material, and
Oh,
it made
that's
it
the
and it made it
worst.
crazy.
Oh no!
I personally have grown to love Reddit. I hated it at first, but now
I hate it.
I adore Reddit.
If I'm researching things, there is a few experts out there that are worth listening to,
No,
but,
it's-
or at
it's
least looking at the
fantastic.
resources. But
I understand Reddit.
so
If
scary.
I wish.
yeah, I won't go into any of the social threads.
No,
Thank you.
it's great there.
Listen, social media gives me anxiety. Like,
Oh, I don't
swear
have
to
a
God,
Facebook.
It
I mean,
does.
Facebook's
Like, I've
awful.
already got social anxiety, and then like tweeting too much will give me anxiety.
We're about to
Responding
outsource.
to too many tweets, like Facebook, all of it.
We're about to outsource our Facebook pages because I can't take them.
Yeah,
So yeah, I found somebody to cover our Facebook pages.
that's good. Yeah, because no, like too much. Like I'm awkward enough. Like I don't really need it pointed out on the internet.
All right, so the next one is pay attention to spelling.
No.
Obviously.
Okay, well, there's spell check and grammar check, so.
But once again, those
Oh,
are
it's
not
saying
going to.
don't blindly check it. Okay,
Yeah, you're
This
going to
is another
miss
one of those
the
things where
does
the
that should be
format change and
theys or
everything,
theirs.
right.
You know.
Well, this had an interesting tip I liked. And what it said is read your whole body, you know, chapter by chapter. Don't, like, overload yourself. But start at the end and read in reverse order. So right to left. And the reason you're doing that is so you don't get the context of the material. Because if you're getting the
Yeah, it's a
context of the
terrible
material.
idea.
Well, what it's
Sounds
suggesting is you'll get lost in it. and your mind
I
assumes
get what you're
You
saying.
will. You'll.
what you're
you'll-
reading
but
instead of
you're
actually
going
reading
to
it.
miss the context in that, like I said.
And the instead of being they.
So it's
Right.
times,
You'll
it's
miss that.
times
I
like
get that.
those when these writer aids, like Pro Writing Aid and Grammarly and things like that, might help out because they'll catch those things. I will say that I've used both the free version of Grammarly and the paid version of Pro Writing Aid, and that's probably the difference. But Pro Writing Aid does pick up those things that I have missed.
I don't know. I feel like it's probably like an antivirus. The more of them you use, the more you're going to find.
I think they're still all going to miss.
That's what I'm saying. It's
No,
the
they
limits
don't
of how they're
necessarily
programmed.
miss
Or
the context issue.
Oh, really?
Like if I put the instead of they, it'll say, "Hey, it looks like you might
Uh,
have used the wrong word
oh,
here."
that's cool.
And then sometimes it'll be like, "Hey, it looks like you've used the wrong word here," and I'm like, "No, that's the right word.
Right.
Did I use this word wrong?" And then I have to go through this whole thing.
I mean, like I said, I
so
think
sometimes
we're-
it just doesn't catch my context.
Yeah.
And well, the next one is writing and editing partners. Basically, is there anyone who's willing to read this?
Get
Who won't
yourself
see
a
it as a
Loki and
chore?
Odin.
Nobody wants to read your stuff.
Very
No, I'm
nice.
kidding. I'm kidding.
It does feel like
Everybody
that.
wants to read it. You're fabulous. We love
Actually,
you.
that doesn't really work that way. Get yourself a tier.
Well, yeah. Well, okay. Look, I've read Tira's work. If she's made mistakes, I can't catch them.
Very few, and it was very minor stuff.
So she's pretty spot on her shit, I think.
Yeah. Or you've had too much to drink.
I drink a lot. My liver hates me.
Anyway,
Hates me.
so that summed up most of those, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
that was
Oh, yeah. You had
tremendous.
another thing you wanted to talk about.
Well, I just had a couple of additional points. Did we say cut out words that are already implied? Like for the example, burning fires, because burning is
Yes.
kind of implied.
But I
That's
Not
contextual as
always.
well. I mean, there's
Not
going to be times where you're
always.
going to do
what
it.
about when he has a burning fire in his heart for her?
Well,
By all means.
I mean, at that point, if you're using romantic
His burning
language,
loins.
Or when he burn.
His
burn.
I
Years
think the
of
more
love.
words, the better.
A ring of fire.
Okay, cutting out weak words such as suddenly, then, was, somewhat, slightly. Be direct.
I don't
Don't-
know. Suddenly and slightly are great words. I don't know.
Sometimes.
No, I overuse them. Okay, I overuse.
Yeah, you don't want
They
to.
will weaken your
And-
writing. So a lot of times you can eliminate those words and make your writing stronger.
And you can, you
Read the
surprise them
sentence.
with, instead
Read
of
the sentence both ways.
Yeah, no, that was my point. Is that I think these rules are useful to challenge you to try it a different way. And if you still like the first way, keep it.
Yeah, I agree. Breaking down sentences to the simplest way to say something. You don't need to add in 30 extra words to work around what you're trying to say.
especially when the more intelligent you try to sound by overpacking a sentence with words, the dumber you tend to sound.
I have an issue where it's like I feel like there's a sentence that's an entire thought, but it's a little complex to unpack. And sometimes it could be broken up, and sometimes I don't think it should be because it ruins the flow
it
and the
depends.
intent.
It depends. Like, and there are some
But-
people who like those more like a more complicated read, something that's more overly
There are
verbose
limits,
is
though.
not really the way that I want to
I do
spend
like
my leisurely reading time.
No, I appreciate, and I've said this before, and I think that I'm taken wrong on it sometimes, but I like the old late 18, early 1900s books where they use these ridiculous words sometimes, and I love them personally.
No, I like
They
a
are-
Well, there's a romantic flow to
word
that
thrown in
cadence
there
that
Well,
way.
yeah,
here and
some of
there,
those
but I don't
words-
want to have to look up like every word in a sentence.
Quintosyllabic words, and I'm like, ooh, what does that mean? Where other people are like, fuck
Here
this word.
and there, that's
So-
cool. But yeah, no, if it's
It
overdone,
just sounds like you're getting off and being a word nerd. You're like,
So,
ooh, that's a sexy
yeah,
word.
it's something that hasn't been used in 100 years,
No, but
yeah, it's like word archaeology.
I bring him up, but I love the guy. Joseph Campbell. I read one of his books, and he had a paragraph that looked like it was about 10 sentences long. Probably had like 11 commas because it was one sentence. It was a full 1/3 of the page. One sentence.
that feels a bit excessive.
I had to reread that thing like 5 times.
But is that really what you're aiming for? Doesn't that take you out of the
No,
story?
you want,
I'm
you
saying-
want your reader to absorb
No, but I'm
what
saying
you're
is
saying.
that's an academic work.
Was there?
It was probably technically correct in every possible way.
I'm sure
and
it
I
was.
hated it.
I feel
like
like
I
they
love his
give-
work. I hated that paragraph.
I feel like they give academics a pass on stuff like that, though. You know.
All right. So, do we want to apply some of this stuff now to
Sure, if
the
you
story
got it.
itself? To give some examples. So, like we said, I recently made the switch from Grammarly over to Pro Writing Aid. They ran a sale for Black Friday, and I jumped all over that shit. And so now we have this to tear apart my writing even more. And so we took chapter 4, and for anybody who doesn't remember, that was the part of the story where Meredith and Jennifer first got their glimpse of each other in the park across the street from the brownstone.
Okay.
So the first part that this is highlighting on me is some extra words that it doesn't feel are necessary. For example, adverbs. And in this case, my sentence was, the woman easily caught up to the old man and handed over a pocketbook, which he accepted with a grateful smile. Now it's highlighting the word easily and telling me, hey, watch your adverbs. Do you really need this word here? And this is the point, is the sentence is either the woman easily caught up to the old man and handed over the pocketbook, which he accepted with a grateful smile, or we eliminate easily, and it's just the woman caught up to the old man and handed over the pocketbook. The word easily is obviously not needed there.
Yeah, but it does add some.
Does it? I feel like it doesn't. I feel like the sentence doesn't change at all if I eliminate that word.
Well, I mean, easily makes it sound like she did it quickly and with little
With
effort.
Do you think that
deft
she had
grace.
do you think she had trouble catching up to the old man? Nobody had that impression in the first
But
place.
what if
it
instead
was
of
unnecessary.
That's
she-
fair.
What if instead of easily she did it with a deft grace?
Why? She's graceful in everything that she does.
Did we already say that in this?
Yeah, I'm sure it's already
Or is it just
implied.
inferred from previous encounters?
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. I get what you're saying. Like
There's no reason for that word to be there.
in that particular
So in
sentence,
this
if
case,
it's said
I will
elsewhere,
eliminate the word.
Yeah. Okay.
So here's another one that it's highlighting, and it is, I think it's giving me the same thing. It's saying, hey, quit with the damn adverbs. And so it says, the woman brushed off his praise, patted the boy on the head, and walked off, pausing only to produce several more pocketbooks, which just as quickly disappeared into the folds of her skirt. Now it's telling me to get rid of quickly, because that's an adverb. However, in this case,
No, I like it.
yeah, I don't necessarily think that we want to get rid of that. And the sentence doesn't work without it. Now, we could reword it, but is it really worth it? So that's kind of my point on that one.
I mean, you could say which quickly disappeared instead of just as.
Quickly still
Oh, I
in
said
there.
like what did I say? Vanished.
Yeah, it really doesn't add anything. Yeah.
Is
I
it
leave
worth it
as
to
is.
rework the sentence? And
Yeah.
I don't feel that it is. Okay, so then the next part is it's saying the sentence is returning.
It is an LY word.
Yeah. Returning to her book, she then proceeded to cross the park, avoiding every obstacle, running child, patch of mud, without lifting her gaze once, not even when crossing the busy street. Now, this is something that we mentioned before, is you don't need to say somebody started to do something, remove those weakened words. And here I said, she then proceeded to cross the park, which that's not necessary.
So you just say she crossed the park.
She crossed the park, right. Simplify the sentence, and I agree with it, so we're going to change that there.
Yeah, I guess you really don't hear yourself doing these things.
Right,
but
and that's the thing, is that it does pick up those things where
I
it just cleans up your sentences.
Look, I know we're doing your chapter here, but I feel like I'm being judged here.
well, we all are, sure.
I'm being attacked.
Because
You're not even
what was the first one again that you had to remove?
No, but I'm
easily.
Right.
I'm feeling my chapters being torn apart before this even gets to them.
Yeah, they will be.
It's going to obliterate them.
I mean,
Because what I'm hearing is that I don't think you intended to put in easily. It flew from you directly into the
it's
text.
just how I talk.
Because
Gross.
you had a concept of that character, and you were representing the character do a thing.
Right.
So of course she did it easily.
Right.
But the difference here is that we've already stated that. But you're
It
just
doesn't need to
exhibiting
be
what
stated.
lives in your
She's
head.
catching up to an
So-
old man, right?
Right. So every time she does a thing, she's always floating. She's always doing this.
Well, we're
And I
always
did
trying
kinda see
to
that
show
happen.
off that Meredith has an easier time doing things than normal humans.
Right, but you only have to say it a few times.
Yeah, I guess so. I guess we don't need to keep shoving it in everybody's face
Well,
that
but I
Meredith
think it's
is better than
subconscious
you.
is my point.
Well, this is
That's
chapter
what I'm saying.
4.
I don't think you mean to do
By
it. You just
now-
do it.
Is better than you.
Yeah, by chapter 4, you should know who this character is. You should know, and like, yes, it
Well, I
should
think
be.
you can add it every
It
now
should
and
be
again.
sprinkled in,
Yeah.
but it doesn't need to be constantly restated.
So once in a while, we're just like, did you remember that Meredith is better than you? Like we just-
Always.
Okay. Okay.
That's good note.
And then.
You want some more examples?
And then. No, and then.
Okay. So this is where Jennifer was talking about trying to pretend to need their services. And so she says she could walk right in the door, pretend to be in need of their services, get a good look around, and find out for sure if they were harboring a pig. So it's telling me that my way of saying pretend to be in need of their services is too wordy, and that it can be broken down to she could waltz right in the door and pretend to need their services, get a good look around, and find out for sure if they're holding a pig.
Wait a minute. That doesn't. What changed?
Pretend to be in need of their services.
But you
They're
said.
saying change it to pretend to need their services. I
Okay.
don't think it necessarily sounds better.
No.
I know what Loki's struggling with here, because I have the same problem. I was a big lover of Arthurian tales as a kid. I've read a lot of Elizabethan language. It's not bothering you because it's more archaic wording. To you, it sounds romantic. It sounds natural because you're used to it. 'Cause, you know, all your Lovecraftian age reading.
You think switch it?
What the suggestion is a
disagree,
more
no.
modern sounding
It is. The
sentence,
setting is the
She is
1910s.
pretending to
which
be
I
in
think
need.
makes it fine. I think we could leave it.
Yeah, leave it alone.
But
You think
but
leave it?
I
Leave
think,
Brittany
look,
alone.
it has a point for modern audience, especially if it was in a modern context. But
I
given,
agree.
given the setting,
I agree.
it's perfectly fine. Now, if you changed it, it really wouldn't matter,
yeah.
Okay.
and it would be simpler,
And
which
that's
would
the
probably
thing,
be the
is there
better
are
thing for an
times,
editor.
like,
But
In my dystopian, where I will write something that is more simplified because a lot of like half the population can't even read anymore, like in this book, and it'll want me to change it to like shall or something like that, and I'm like, no one's
Really?
talking. Yeah, no one's
I get
talking
yelled
like
at
that.
for archaisms.
Well, it's like, you know what I'm saying, like that kind of wording, and I'm like, no one's
I
using
love
that
using
wording in this book.
Okay. So in conclusion, did I surprise you?
In conclusion,
Pay attention to your own bias and read it.
you know, make sure that these suggestions work for you.
But so, would you suggest this program?
Oh yes, I like it quite a bit.
Do you
I
feel like you got the bang for the buck? Is it worth the money they're asking? What is the regular
over
price?
time it will be. So the regular
an
price
investment.
is like $240, I think, $250, something like that,
Wow.
for a lifetime. You can also
Lifetime.
yeah, you can pay for it in shorter increments. I tend to, if I can pay for everything all
Yeah,
at
like
once,
to
I
have it
do.
knocked out.
I
yeah.
don't like to have bills. So in this case, it was actually half price for Black Friday, and from what I understand, they do run those kinds of promotions here and there. So if you like trail it until it goes on sale,
I mean, there will be another Black Friday.
there will be, but I'm sure they'll run another sale at some point.
Depends. Depends.
If there will be another Black Friday.
There might not be.
Well,
I guess
in
you
which
never
case
know.
we really won't have to worry about publishing.
So anyway, like it's not so much that it's I mean, yeah, it does point out things that I probably would have overlooked previously. But I mean, I think that it's definitely worth it for the price that I paid.
Cool.
And it definitely makes my editing process much faster.
Awesome. All right. So, do we have anything else?
No, I think that we got the gist of all the, more detailed editing.
Wonderful. So we'll be back with you next week. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at the Darkstormy K1. Go check out our website at the darkandstormynights.begvasirmedia.com, and you can go directly to the darkandstormynights.podbean.com to listen to our show. We're also available on Spotify, YouTube, bunch of places.
Yes. A few places. Oh, and go check out the Dark and Stormy Nights website, and if you're looking for a new book to read, we have some book reviews and recommendations on there.
We'll see you soon.
Bye.
Bye.